I'll admit there's been a lot of talk about unemployment here in Canada, and if we could see a total flip of the scenario that we've been seeing for the past year headed into 2023, we've been in this era of extremely low unemployment with a labor shortage, and there's talk that we might see ourselves in a situation very soon where we see rising unemployment levels, feeling the hurt from the Bank of Canada as they rapidly increase interest rates. Well, a new report came out just today that could be this turning point for jobs, and it relates to a study that the Bank of Canada recently released that shows in a worst case scenario, we could see up to 10% of Canadians unemployed. So let's talk about this new data from today and how it maps to the Bank of Canada's projections for upcoming job losses, and how all of this has a major impact on which way interest rates go in the future, effectively impacting every area of the Canadian economy. So let's jump right into the information, and if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can continue to get financial updates that are focused specifically for Canadians. Now, I want to provide some context here because this is what Tiff Macklem, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, said about the labor market recently, and how in order to avoid a worst case scenario, we're going to have to feel some pain when it comes to the amount of Canadians that are able to hold jobs over the long term. Listen to this.
The overriding imperative is to ensure that high inflation does not become entrenched, because if that happens, nothing works well. This was the experience of the 1970s. The failure to control inflation resulted in high inflation and high unemployment. Labor strife increased as workers tried to cope with large increases in the cost of living. And ultimately, it took much higher interest rates and a severe recession with a large increase in unemployment to rein in inflation and re-anchor inflation expectations. That's exactly what everyone wants to avoid. That's why we front-loaded our interest rate increases, and that's why we are resolute in our commitment to return inflation to the 2% target. To get there, we need to rebalance the labor market. This will be a difficult adjustment. We want to do this in the best way possible for Canadian workers and businesses. Higher interest rates will help cool spending and the demand for labor in the economy.
Here, Tiff Macklem's taking a look at the 80s and what could be a worst case scenario for today that he's exactly trying to avoid. He thinks back to a time when, okay, we were seeing inflation start to rise and we raised interest rates, but maybe not quickly enough. The raise in interest rates allowed for a higher unemployment rate, but it wasn't quite enough to tame inflation. So we had a worst case scenario where we had inflation running hot at the very same time that we're seeing high unemployment. And then to fix that, they had to raise rates even higher and even faster than they were expecting to get the whole thing under control. And he says, we don't want that to happen today here in Canada. So as a result, we're going to have to rebalance the labor market and make it so that less people have jobs and inflation goes down now today, so we don't have this sort of long-term worst case scenario. Now, this is a controversial point of view in many areas. Many people have the opinion that it shouldn't be the central bank bringing down demand and sort of artificially suppressing demand like this when a lot of the issues in inflation are due to supply, but that's a topic for another day. That's why it's so important to look at reports like these, the one that came out just today, because we know these are the same reports that the Bank of Canada is looking at to make its forward-facing decisions. And this is the job vacancies report for the third quarter. It just came out today, and I think you'll find it rather interesting. We saw a reduction in the number of job vacancies in Canada. Last quarter, it was 5.7% of job vacancies, and now we're at 5.4% job vacancies, meaning there are less job vacancies today than there were last quarter. Now, let me explain why this has such a big impact. There's a connection between unemployment numbers in Canada and the amount of job vacancies in Canada. Of course, if there's more job vacancies, that means that employers are having a hard time filling that position, meaning that there's more people that are employed, right? That's the labor shortage we've been talking about over the past year. Now, this shift where we're seeing job vacancies go down, that means, okay, there's more people filling these jobs and there are more people unemployed because the amount of vacancies that are available for people to fill, well, that has gone down. So keep that concept in your head. Less vacancies means, in general, higher unemployment. We're going to go into more data about that in a Bank of Canada study that was recently released that is rather insightful for how many jobs we'll lose in the future if interest rates continue to stay at the level they are now. But first, I want to take a look at this because I found it really interesting, and I think that you will too. This shows, again, the amount of vacancies in the job market, but it splits it up into two different categories. The red bar is the amount of short-term short-term job vacancies, and the blue bars are the amount of long-term vacancies. And so the reason that's impactful is because the more long-term job vacancies there are means that employers are having a harder time filling those individual roles. So at the same time, when we're seeing a decrease in job vacancies, that's this red bar to the next red bar, we're also seeing an increase in the proportion of those vacancies that are long-term vacancies. And you can sort of see that over time with the green line here and see how it sort of shoots up. A higher percentage, around just under 40% of these vacancies are, well, they're this blue bar, the long-term job vacancies. What this reveals in my eyes is that while there will be higher unemployment, and this is the sort of direction this chart is going with the higher or lower vacancy data, there are certain sections of the economy that will have trouble hiring even going into the future, perhaps because the jobs in some people's eyes are unfavorable relative to the amount of pay that they actually get. Well, let me show you another chart that explains this more clearly. And this is important to understand heading into the study we're going to take a look at in a moment that shows how the Bank of Canada projects job losses to go headed into 2023 and potentially into this recessionary environment. But here you can see the different occupations that have either higher or lower percentages of sticky vacancies, right? Those vacancies that are more long-term rather than short-term. And you can see the top three here, the ones that have the stickiest vacancies, the ones that are going to stick around even when we're seeing higher unemployment, and that is health occupations, trades, transport, and equipment operators, and national resources, agriculture, and related production occupations. And we've seen sort of growth in more sticky vacancies even in other areas, but this is lower on the list in business, finance, and administration occupations. And my theory for what determines which industries have these stickier vacancies depends on three different things. The first one is how favorable the job is in the eyes of the public, like how positively seen is that job in society, as well as what is the experience working that job. The second one is, okay, what's the cost of education to get into that type of job? And the third one, what is the pay relative to the cost of education and the general outlook for the job, and how pleasant it is to be working in that field. I believe that's why we're seeing health occupations at the top here with the highest number of long-term job vacancies, because, well, people have sort of heard about this health crisis and see how overworked people are. That's the first category. Relative to other categories, it does take a lot of training to enter these health fields, and the pay relative to other fields with similar amounts of education is rather low for certain health occupations. Now, if we contrast that to the bottom here, business, finance, and administration, yes, there is a high education cost to get into these fields, but typically they're better paying and maybe they're a little bit more cushy of jobs, right? A lot of these areas you can work from home, and the pay relative to the work that you do might feel better as someone working in that job, right? This is my theory on why these things are spread the way that they are. But how does this all play into the predictions for 2023 from the Bank of Canada as to how many jobs we'll lose in Canada and how high the unemployment rate will go? Well, it all relates to this interesting concept, and it's called the Beveridge curve. And that's not like beverage like you're having a pop. It's spelled a little bit differently. Beveridge is after the person who invented this sort of way of looking at things called William Beveridge. I guess we can call him Bill Beveridge. I came up with the Beveridge curve. But it's an interesting way that they describe the relation between job vacancies, the vacancy rate we've just been talking about, and the level of unemployment that we can expect to see for any given level of vacancy. It sounds complex, but I'll explain it. It's very simple. Here's an example of a Beveridge curve, and essentially the relationship is that as the amount of vacancies or the vacancy rate goes down in the economy, we'll also see unemployment rates go higher and higher, right? This is the relationship, and it can be anywhere along this curve, and it's a convenient way for us to predict how many job losses we'll see in the market given the amount of vacancies. We're going to take a closer look at that Beveridge curve in just a second, but using this tool, the Bank of Canada has created a base case, or what they think will most likely happen, and they say given current labor market conditions, labor demand could cool while causing a rise, but not a surge in unemployment, saying that unemployment won't go up dramatically, but we're going to see it go up here in the next number of months. In our base case, a return of job vacancies to normal levels is associated with an increase in the unemployment rate of around 1.5, Right now in Canada, we're at 5.1% unemployment. So the Bank of Canada is saying the most likely situation is that this goes up to 6.6% unemployment. This increase is material, particularly for those directly impacted, the people who are going to lose their jobs as a result of their policy decisions, but far below what has historically been observed during recessions. That base case prediction actually maps to the chart that we were looking at just previously. If you take a look at the black line here, that shows the base case scenario for the Bank of Canada, and the dotted line that you can see here sort of cutting through the middle shows the 2011 to 2019 average vacancy rate in the economy, average job vacancy rate. So they're saying, okay, we're expecting job vacancies to get back down to their average. So what does that mean for employment? Well, taking a look at this curve, the black one here, we can see the point at which we hit that historically average vacancy rate, and that is the base case, this scenario 2, and it's right here. They're saying, okay, around 6.6 is where we're expected to see the unemployment rate, 6.6% of Canadians who are in the workforce looking for jobs. They don't only have this base case, the one they think is most likely to happen, they also have other cases, potentially mapping out worst case scenarios. Now, this curve can change for any number of reasons. One of them is like how able you are to match an individual employee to an employer, so that the skills are matched for the job that they need, and how efficient that matching rate is can change what this looks like. But let's just take a look outside of why these curves change at what a worst case scenario could look like, and that is this scenario 4, the red line. Just like we did for the black line, if we're taking a look at the red line here, we can see where it is when it crosses this average vacancy rate. So if we were to get job vacancies back down to their average like they were pre-pandemic, pre all of this, again, average over the past 10 years or so, when we get to that point where they cross, well, we're looking more like a 9.9, 9.8% unemployment to get to that average vacancy rate. And that may not sound like a big difference, but the difference between 6.6% of Canada's population being unemployed versus 9.6% of Canada's population being unemployed is a dramatic difference, because this 9.6% rate is even higher than we saw during the Great Recession, right? That financial situation we saw in 2008. Largely, Canada wasn't as heavily impacted as the States was during that time period. But if we were to be in this worst case scenario with that 9.6% unemployment rate, this is a hard landing of the economy. Well, it would be worse than our situation was during that 2008 financial crisis. At our current 5.1% unemployment rate, that's roughly 1,050,000 Canadians that currently do not have a job and are looking for one. If we were to see that worst case scenario play out, and that unemployment rate going to 9.6%, that would be close to 2 million Canadians without a job as a result of the rapidly increasing interest rates that are acting to try to sort of quell demand, bring down demand, and reduce the tightness in the labor market. And it's important that we take a close look at this type of thing, because the Bank of Canada says they're not going to change anything when it comes to interest rates until they see a rebalancing of the labor market. That means that Canadians who are struggling with these higher interest rates than certainly the last 5 to 10 years than we've seen in that time, well, they could have to hold out a little bit longer if we don't see this job and employment numbers changing. And take a look at this. This is the unemployment rate over time in Canada, and it's not going in the direction the Bank of Canada wants at this point. We can see that unemployment has actually trended down over the past number of months, between last month and this month in terms of the data that we're looking at, and we've seen a 0.1% decrease in unemployment, and the Bank of Canada doesn't really want to see this, right? They want to see more unemployment so that we have more slack in the labor market, less demand for goods and services, and as a result, lower inflation. That's the whole reason they're doing all of this, right? But it is widely understood that largely the interest rate changes that the Bank of Canada makes isn't seen fully in the economy for about a year after they make that decision. We first see it in some of these sort of leading indicator spaces, like the real estate market, where interest rates directly impact it very quickly, and we've seen how far real estate prices have come down. So there's an argument to be made that when it comes to unemployment, well, the unemployment or the job market isn't really feeling the impact of what the Bank of Canada has already done at this point. But in any respect, the Bank of Canada is going to be looking for this number to go down next time we see it. or rather to go up. Man, I've got things backwards. The unemployment number to go up, employment to go down. And until they see that unemployment number go up and inflation come down, well, it seems like the Bank of Canada is going to either have to hold ground and keep their interest rates where they currently are, or even increase them further than they already have. They've indicated that for the next interest rate increase, they're going to be looking at whether or not they should increase, not how much to increase, which is a sort of indicator that they could actually keep it the same over the next number of decisions. But they're not going to start putting it down until they start to see inflation come down dramatically and unemployment go up dramatically. So a lot of people with variable rate mortgages will be hoping to see higher unemployment numbers, or in this sort of reverse scenario where central banks and their policy make people think, okay, we need bad news and that is good. If we get bad news for the economy, it means that central banks could lower interest rates again, which is good for investments, good for employment, and good for business growth, right? So it's going to be interesting to watch going forward, and I'm curious what you think about all of it. Obviously, we went through a lot here in today's video, but what do you think about the direction of unemployment? Do you think we're going to see this worst case scenario play out in 2023, or do you think the Bank of Canada kind of has it on par, saying, okay, we're probably going to be around 6.6% employment at its peak over the next couple of years? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one, and I try to get back to a bunch of them, and if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep on getting financial updates like this focused on Canadians. I don't think there's enough content out there specifically aimed at Canadians. So if you appreciate that, feel free to hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel dramatically. And with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.